What if the key to team success lies in understanding and leveraging each person's unique strengths? Jennifer Pasquale, a dual certified Gallup Strengths coach, believes it does.
And I just felt like I didn't have a center anymore. I didn't quite know how I wanted to use my skills, how I wanted to show up professionally and personally. And so I had known a military spouse who was a strengths coach, and I met with her and did my CliftonStrengths, and it blew me away. And it really, I mean, even now, it still gives me chills when I talk about it, because it really gave me language for who I am in a way that I'd never understood before. I can literally watch them in a workshop sit taller, smile bigger, engage more. And so then when they go in a conversation, when we do an exercise and they're working with a teammate, I see them really kind of own this part of themselves in a way that they hadn't before. It gave them that perspective of, maybe I haven't had a traditional career path. Maybe I've done a lot of volunteering. Maybe I don't really think of that as valuable, because that's how we build self-awareness. And self-awareness is how we build teams that are more connected, where people feel seen and heard and feel like they can belong to something, which we know is something the workplace is changing to really require.
I think that more people need to understand the importance of strengths and what it will do going forward for their life and their work. What if the key to team success lies in understanding and leveraging each person's unique strengths? Jennifer Pasquale, a dual certified Gallup Strengths coach, believes it does. She's here to talk about how she transforms teams and helps military spouses walk proudly in their own paths. Get ready to explore the power of strengths and connection. Welcome to the show, Jen.
Thanks, Mike. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. Thanks so much for taking the time, especially on a Friday. Really appreciate it. So you're a dual certified Gallup Strengths coach. What initially drew you to this CliftonStrengths framework, and why has it been so impactful in your work?
So for me, it was a season of kind of feeling a little bit lost. As you mentioned, I have a background, if you will, or I've lived a life in the military space for almost 20 years. And so I was at a point in kind of that time where I had been a professional and had my career. I had to pivot that a few times as we'd moved around the world. And I just felt like I didn't have a center anymore. I didn't quite know how I wanted to use my skills, how I wanted to show up professionally and personally. And so I had known a military spouse who was a strengths coach, and I met with her and did my CliftonStrengths, and it blew me away. And it really, even now, it still gives me chills when I talk about it, because it really gave me language for who I am in a way that I'd never understood before. And it really allowed me to celebrate these parts of myself that I think I had tried to temper over the years because I didn't really understand them. And it just let me instead celebrate those. And she helped me do that. And so for me, it was incredibly transformative. And so then the love was there. I was hooked. And then it was just figuring out how I wanted to bring this into the world and how I wanted to give CliftonStrengths to more and more people, and in what ways.
So I totally agree with what you're saying. I think that understanding who you are at the core opens up so many different avenues, especially in business. So what transformations have you seen when a team leans into their unique capabilities?
So there's lots of examples and lots of different ways it shows up. One of my favorite ways that I see it is really about the individual that then has this impact on the collective. So what I see in individuals is a lot of what I went through, where they didn't really understand themselves, didn't have language for themselves. And once they do, I can literally watch them in a workshop sit taller, smile bigger, engage more. And so then when they go in a conversation, when we do an exercise and they're working with a teammate, I see them really own this part of themselves in a way that they hadn't before. And so then if you think about it, the ripple effect of that is now the team has people that are more engaged in doing the things that they love doing and doing them in this way that feels very natural. And it automatically has an impact on productivity and how they're communicating with each other and how they're resolving conflict with each other. So I've seen it from so many different directions, depending on what a team has been struggling with, but it really comes down to the individual and then that ripple effect impact on the team.
When you were saying that, I made a strange connection. About a year ago, we adopted this dog from the shelter to add to our other two that we already have. And you could tell right away he was severely abused. You'd go to pet him, he would flinch. We dealt with any physical issues that he has, pain, whatever, took care of all of that. And he's a different dog today, completely different dog. But one of the things that I've noticed about him is that, we've praised him for different behaviors. I don't think he was ever used to that. I think all he ever did was get yelled at. And even now, like, he'll leave our living room and go down the hallway and hover at the end of the hallway. And I'll call his name. And he'll start to come. And he turns back around and goes into the bedroom. And it's almost as though the old is still like lingering there, but the new is, oh, they like me, I'm going to go over there. The old is going, but if I go over there, they're going to hurt me. So it's interesting how that self-confidence helps even an animal be completely different. So I wanted to talk about, because you mentioned being involved in the military life. And I think that's a unique situation that a lot of people don't understand. And I know you have this pride and grit, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. You work with military spouses, but how does this strength-based approach benefit the military spouses? Like, what do they get?
No, I appreciate that. So for about 6 years, I ran Pride and Grit, which is really about helping spouses in the transition space. So it was helping them lean into their identity, rediscover their identity, because for many of them, they have been following their service member around the world for a decade or 2 or 3. And the casualty of that for them was their identity. And so what I found in that work is strengths was, because again, it was me doing the same thing. It was the impact it had on me. It gave them that language. It gave them that perspective of, maybe I haven't had a traditional career path. Maybe I've done a lot of volunteering. Maybe I don't really think of that as valuable. And so what strengths did is gave them the ability to stake their flag in, this is my unique value everywhere I am. This is my value as a parent, as a partner, as a volunteer, as a career person. It doesn't matter where you show up. Strengths becomes this undercurrent for everything you do. And so I think what I saw in spouses is much what I saw in teams, where they just are able to take a breath and sit up a little taller and go, okay, this is who I am, and this is valuable, and I get to reinvent myself with these things in mind in the next season when we go into civilian life. So I absolutely have loved that work. And what I've done now under my new brand is, as I focus on corporations, I've carved out a section where I'm continuing to invest in military connected groups, and where I have a training later today where I can help those individuals that are in this transition season just try to understand themselves a little better. So it is work that I care a lot about, because to your point, it's just a unique experience being in the military community, particularly when we look at what the last 20 years have looked like for those families.
No, it's interesting because years back, I was friends with a few couples who the husband was stationed at Camp Pendleton. And one of the things I always noticed was the wives were very a lost boat. They didn't really have their thing. And when you talk to them about it, it's because I never know when I'm going to stay in an area for very long and when I'm going to get moved somewhere else. And so it's hard to make friends. It's hard to put roots down. It's hard to get involved in volunteering and all that stuff. And I think by teaching women and men who are spouses of a military person what their strengths are and who they are as a person, you enable them to blossom and shine. Something that maybe more of them should go through is something like this, because it was always sad to me that it was like their entire identity was their spouse. And nobody likes that. And I've even had some people who don't understand say, oh, but it's like that in the corporate world. You're going to get moved whenever. Not really. Like, the military just tells you in a moment's notice, you're going here, and you go. You can't say no, I'm not going to Chicago. If a corporate company said to me, I'm in California, you're going to send you to Chicago, I could say, no, I'm not going to Chicago. I'll get another job. Sorry. It's different. I think that having that understanding of who they are will be a strong help, especially like if their spouse is deployed for long periods of time. You can't be so dependent on that person. They're not there. So I think knowing who you are and what it is you're about is a key. And it's funny because you would think that people, especially adults, would already have that figured out, but we just don't. Most of us don't anyway. I'm almost 60 years old, and I think just in the last 10 years, I've figured that stuff out. And I'm proud that I figured it out, but I'm also disappointed that I didn't figure it out sooner. So
I was just going to say, one of the things that I think I've witnessed in my 20 years in military life is that there is an evolution happening in the military spouse, how to show up in this community and in this environment. And I think when I started, it was very much more common, what you mentioned. Having a dual income household was not maybe as common as it is now, and partly because it's necessary now in a way that it might not have been then. And so I think it's been an interesting thing to watch, because while spouses may have been able to maintain their careers, remote work has allowed for spouses to move those careers around the world. This identity thread seems to be this thing that we just have a harder time getting in front of. And there is more support that's needed in that area. So I appreciate you bringing that into the conversation.
Yeah. And throughout my notes, I keep seeing this phrase that you use, leading with curiosity. How do curiosity and a strength-based focus work together to foster better collaboration and connection within a team?
I think the way I see it is that fundamentally leaning into your strengths is about being curious. If you're not curious about yourself and about your colleagues, and if you don't take the stance that I may not have the answer, then you are inherently going to be curious about what's going on around you. And so I think strengths is like the perfect connection to curiosity, because that's how we build self-awareness. And self-awareness is how we build teams that are more connected, where people feel seen and heard and feel like they can belong to something, which we know is something the workplace is changing to really require. A lot of people now, if they're going to be in an organization, they want it to be a place where they feel like their voice matters and they have value and they understand that value and they can contribute, and those contributions are appreciated. And the more they understand the strengths, the easier it is to articulate their value in those settings. So I see curiosity and strengths as being sitting arm in arm through this process of self-awareness, which allows us to just connect better.
It makes sense. What's like kind of a roadblock for people in getting there, though?
It's interesting because one of the things I'll talk about a lot of times when I do workshops around strengths is we'll talk about the fact that any strength, it doesn't matter what strength it is, it can be a catalyst for your success and growth and happiness, and it can be a barrier to those things as well. And so building awareness is about really understanding the range of that particular strength. And so what I see as a challenge for folks is sometimes, and I'm guilty of this too, right? I have a couple of strengths where when they're turned up a little too far, they can really impede my ability to get things done. They can impede my ability to make decisions, right? So the barrier is this lack of understanding about this thing that's really cool about me. And that same thing can actually hold me back. It can make me seem more abrasive to my colleagues. It can make perception of me be something that I don't even realize is happening. And that changes the dynamic within the team in a way that's not useful. But once I understand it, I can talk about it differently and my colleagues can learn about it differently, which honestly is one of the things that I really love seeing on teams is when someone on the team, I can see that like light bulb go off over their head where they realize they have misunderstood a colleague the whole time they've worked with them. They didn't really understand why they were asking questions the way that they did, why they needed information in a specific way in order to really be settled about whatever the information was. And I'll see them have this aha moment where they realize I was part of the problem. I thought it was them, but it was really my lack of awareness for what that person needed. It was that lack of curiosity for what is this disconnect really about? And what's my contribution to the disconnect by not being curious about this other person?
Yeah, my approach has always been with teams. When I do team meetings, every month we'll do a what's working and what's not working. And anything that's not working, let's say it's got something to do with the email server. There's a server administrator who handles that stuff. But instead of putting them in charge of the entire project, I'll take one of the help desk technicians and make them the point person. And what happens is they begin to learn what the server administrator needs to know in order to address the issue. And they start to learn about each other's jobs. They gain a little bit more respect for each other. And to your point, they start to see places where, wow, I've worked with you for 5 years and I never understood that you wanted this. And you watch their connection and their relationship just go on a great path upward because they now understand each other better and they understand each other's role better. And to me, one of the keys to a great team is if you have five spots on your team, they're there for a reason, and each role has its purpose. And I think it's important that the entire team understand what each other's doing, because when they run into a problem, how else do they decide who's supposed to solve it, whose responsibility it is, who should I talk to get answers? They have to understand that. And I've come in behind managers who like siloed everybody and made them like so far apart from one another. And I believe in more of a decentralized, like step back as the leader and kind of guide where necessary, but let them do their job. That's, you hire them and you pay them good money for a reason. Let them do their jobs. So you work with corporate teams and you also have worked with military spouses. How do you adapt your approach when coaching a corporate team versus working with a military spouse?
Oh, I love that question. In some ways, I think what I tend to find in the military space is because those are my people, right? And this is a life I've lived. I think there is a level of vulnerability and authenticity that we can get to almost instantly, because there's just this sort of shared understanding of the challenges and of how these strengths might show up in anything that we do. So I think in the corporate setting, that kind of trust and vulnerability may take a minute. It may take an extra step. It may take someone in the group really ripping that Band-Aid off and being that person in the group to show them it's okay to do that. So I think for me, it's a little bit of patience with that process, and making the space for that to happen is one of the things probably a little bit different in the two groups. But really, at the end of the day, the strengths are very similar. It's more about examples is probably where my differences come in. How I position a strength in terms of how it would impact a team is going to be a different example than with a military spouse. But a lot of it's actually quite similar.
It's not surprising to me at all. What are some common misconceptions about strength-based coaching?
Oh, I think occasionally I will have someone who kind of struggles with a particular strength, right? They see something, and here's where it comes into play a lot, is they will feel like if there's a strength at the bottom, I often do what's called the full 34, which rank orders your strengths in a list of 34. And inherently, people go to the bottom first, right? They want to see what are the things I don't do. And they'll get a little caught up in that. And so the misconception, I think, around the work is that I need to grow these things that are down here. If empathy is at the bottom, I can't be a good leader. And that is 100% untrue. So part of the work is getting folks to separate from this expectation. And it's historical, right? Particularly in corporations. 20 years ago, right? The model was, let's get you better at the things that you aren't good at, instead of figuring out what you naturally excel at and really exponentially investing in those. And so that's one of the, I don't know if it's a misconception exactly, but it's a struggle that I often find where folks will get hyper-focused on those things at the bottom, and they will feel like it's an indicator of their character. If empathy is number 34 for me, I must be a terrible leader. I must be not approachable. They attach all these meanings to it and tell all these stories. When in the end, if we can focus on what you do have, we see you have high connectedness or high developer or high other talents that have this relationship component. And so you're going to still be approachable, and you're going to be able to be comforting to people and be able to be supportive, but you're going to do it in your own way. And that's okay too. There's no one right way to be. I think that's another thing I often hear is it's like, what's the best profile? What's the best combination of strengths? And it's like, there aren't any. It is be who you are. That's the best combination. And so getting folks off this idea that there's a right answer, because there's not a right answer. The right answer is, this is the talents that you naturally bring to the table. How do you do that more often? That's the right answer. So those are a couple of things that I run into.
Yeah, I always coach people to put themselves in a position to play to their strengths while understanding what their weaknesses are. Because when you do that, you take on tasks that fit what your strengths are. And then you, as a leader especially, have to delve into areas where you're weak. But by being aware of the fact that you're maybe not quite as strong in that area, you can approach it with a little bit more caution and a little more intentional approach to it, is a good way to put it. So what's probably the most surprising strength that you've discovered in yourself?
Oh, so for me, my number one is a strength called restorative. I actually just did a podcast on this particular strength recently.
Nice.
that was a huge eye opener for me because I often was in situations where I felt like I was the Debbie Downer, right? I was the person coming in saying, have we thought about this thing that could happen in the future? And I was constantly looking down the road for the risk, if you will. And so when I understood my restorative, so much made sense. There's several of my strengths where this is true, but restorative was one that really has taken me time to have a love-hate with it because it is inherently a fixer, right? It is someone who just wants to fix things and wants to restore them back to how they were. So you're looking at the why and you like to dig in, peel the layers and understand all the things. And then you're really good at coming up with solutions. And so for me, it was really empowering to recognize that my problem-solving capabilities were number one and to lean into that. But then I also had to acknowledge that my need for why and my need for thinking a few steps ahead wasn't always going to be received by people who don't have that capability. And that's not how they look at the world. So I can think of several meetings I was in where there's this great idea and I'm like, okay, but what happens if this happens? And they're like, we don't care about that because who knows? And that's fair, right? They don't have that restorative, but I do. And so I want to consider it. And so that was, for me, really interesting and challenging and empowering. It was everything at once. And it is one I continue to learn and grow in for sure.
That's one of the things. I run multiple businesses with my wife. And for me, there are certain things that I just have to have documented. And for her, she's a little more loosey-goosey about things. And so over time, I've had to learn to loosen up a little bit, and she's had to learn to tighten up a little bit. And then we've met in the middle, and it just works. So I wanted to test my notes out here. Is it true that you have cats?
Cats. I have 2 cats.
So if you were going to assign a CliftonStrengths theme to each of your cats, what would they be, and how do they show up in each one of them?
No. This is what I needed to prep for.
My apologies.
No, you're fine. I was chuckling at your story earlier because we adopted both of ours. They were a bonded pair. And one of them doesn't have a tail. We don't know the story about the tail, but he's super skittish. And so I was resonating with your story earlier about your dog. But one of them would probably be Command because he very much needs to tell you what he thinks. And he very much has an opinion all the time and just is very emphatic about how he feels about things. And that's an important part and is willing to take charge of the situation, right? I'm going to sit in your lap whether you like it or not. That's how command leaders are, but you understand, right? This is a comical exercise. So the other one is the one without the tail. And he, man, that's a hard one. Like, I don't have one that's coming to mind for him. He is not a relator. He is more, I'd say, an activator because you even come within a millimeter of him, right? He just takes off. He's the one who just going to get going. He may not go anywhere. You may not finish where he was headed because he's very distractible, but he'll take off in a second. And I happen to have activator, and I love that particular talent for myself because it helps me get started on things. It helps me get going.
Yeah.
It doesn't always help me finish them, but it does help me get going. Yeah.
You know, I relate to that as well. We have 4 cats, and the youngest one is Jasper, and he's this black cat. And he's almost a dog. He's so affectionate. And at night, my wife does not like the cats in the bedroom. So we have a routine before we go to bed where she puts the dogs outside through our bedroom sliding glass door. And then I shake a bag of Temptations and all the cats come running. And then she closes the bedroom door. What Jasper doesn't understand is Sunday to Friday, we pretty much have a bedtime that we go to bed. But on Friday and Saturday, it's whatever. We live in Las Vegas. Sometimes we're out late. Like tonight, we're going to a Golden Knights game. We're going to be out late. So you'll be sitting on the couch on a Friday night or a Saturday night, and it's like past the bedtime. And he has to come out and be like, "Sure, I want my food. I want my snacks." And we always laugh because he's very demanding about it, like to the point where he won't stop talking to you about, "Hey, I want my snacks." And it's hilarious, but it just reminds me of like how simple, if you look at animals on a base level. They're so simple with, I've done this every night. Let's keep doing this. And I don't understand the difference between Friday night and Thursday night. How come you're still on that couch? Why am I getting my snacks? It's just funny. And hearing you talk about your cat, like telling you what's on its mind. It's very much like Jasper does that to me too. If I leave my office after this interview, he'll be outside waiting for me and he'll have something to tell me for sure. So
I'm chuckling because one of them is outside my door going,
trying to get in.
I'm usually in your office. Why am I out here?
Yeah, my partner in crime is under the desk over here. She sleeps in my office during the day, one of the dogs. So here's an interesting one for you. I sometimes try to come up with these. That last one was a fun question. I try to come up with other fun questions. It brings out your personal side a little bit. Let's say you're training a superhero team. So a team of superheroes.
Okay.
Which 3 strengths would you focus on for a successful team?
Oh, for a successful team. As a superhero. All right. I would probably focus on, for superheroes, maybe Maximizer. So Maximizer is really about continuing to make things better and better and better, and just never being settled in good enough, but always wanting to strive for better. So I think that feels very superhero-ish. I think potentially, because I'm thinking about the different colors, right? There's the 4 domains. So I'm thinking like, okay, one influencer, that's Maximizer. Probably one like relationship builder, because you got to have to interact with people, right? So I'm thinking maybe connectedness, because as a superhero, there's probably value in being able to see how all these different things might be connected and how your role is going to make a broader difference in what's happening. So I could see that. And then I think I'll go easy and go achiever, which is really just, let's get this done, right? Let's knock these challenges off our list and make things happen. So those would probably be my 3.
Awesome. I've enjoyed speaking with you. How about you let our audience know how they can connect with you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. The easiest way, if you're on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can certainly find me there. And then our website is leadwithcuriosity.co. So you can find us on our website and find all the information about how we work with teams and work with individuals and what our latest offerings might be. So that's probably the best.
Awesome. I encourage listeners to connect and reach out to you if they have questions. I think that more people need to understand the importance of strengths and what it will do going forward for their life and their work. But thanks again so much for taking the time to be here. I know it's not easy to take time out of your busy schedule, and I do appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Mike. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone, for being here for another episode of Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge. We have new episodes every Wednesday at 8 a.m. Pacific time on YouTube and LinkedIn. So hope to see you back here next week for another episode. Why don't you comment below? Let me know some insight you've gotten out of this episode. Would love to hear from you. Thanks, everybody.